This is the Rate of Rise Live Series, episode number 4. Today we're talking about teaching roasting with Ann Cooper of Equilibrium Master Roasters. Well, hey everybody, my name is Chris DiFiorio with Keys to the Shop, and welcome to the 4th installment of the Rate of Rise Live Series, brought to you by Roast Magazine, which is one of the industry's longest running and most respected trade journals, where they feature insights and instruction from the world's top minds in coffee. Scientists, professionals, subject matter experts, all are within the pages of Roast Magazine and beyond. Roast Magazine also publishes books such as Green Coffee, the Book of Roast, as well as Cheap Coffee. You definitely need to check them out over at roastmagazine.com and subscribe today. You can actually get $5 off your subscription by using the code ROR when you subscribe to Roast Magazine. If you're a roaster and you really want to stay in tune with the latest research, business practices, and insights on the craft of roasting, then you need to subscribe to Roast Magazine. Be sure to check them out over at roastmagazine.com. Now today, in our 4th installment of the Rate of Rise Live Series, we are going to be talking with Ann Cooper. Now, the Rate of Rise Live Series, in case you're wondering why it's different than the Rate of Rise normal, it is a live recording that was done face-to-face with our guests during the Boston Expo, the SCA's Boston Expo that happened in April. We got to go there with Roast Magazine and sit down with these amazing professionals and get some insights from them about very specific areas that are relevant to the roasting community and really just the coffee community in general. And I'm really excited to be able to sit down with Ann Cooper of Equilibrium Master Roasters. We had her on as a guest of the show on the first Rate of Rise episode back in January of 2021. And Ann Cooper has been in the coffee industry for over 25 years. She's an Australian roaster who has gained extensive experience in many areas of the coffee industry, such as barista, Café Owner, manager, national barista trainer, head roaster and production manager at both the national and international level. She is a certified Q grader and regularly judges coffee competitions all over the world. She is the founder of Equilibrium Master Roasters, her consulting and training company, where she works both remotely and in person with roasters to hone their skills and really equip the next generation of roasters well with insights and knowledge. And it's that equipping part, that roast training part that we're going to be talking about today specifically. We've got 30 minutes with Ann face-to-face talking about how to train people to roast. And a lot of us are going to be in that position. If you're a roaster, you want to bring up an apprentice or somebody that'll help take the load off of you. This is an incredibly important conversation. And Ann, as always, is amazing and insightful and full of energy for coffee, the coffee community, and teaching. So I hope you really enjoy this episode, and let's get right to it. Here now for the 4th episode of the Rate of Rise Live Series is Ann Cooper of Equilibrium Master Roasters. Ann Cooper.
Hello.
Welcome. Good day. Ann Cooper of Master Roasters, Equilibrium Master Roasters.
Yes.
I am excited because we've had you on Rate of Rise before.
Yep.
And it was such a great conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Obviously, your wealth of knowledge, and you teach, you equip the future of roasting. I mean, this is what you do with your brand and your day in and day out. We were just talking before we started recording about the pandemic and how you were just doing things remotely with people, even just like seeing on FaceTime or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, and you're dedicated to it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely shown us other ways to do our training. So, sort of, we don't always have to have that face-to-face, on-site kind of interaction. And I think it's been really great for roasters to also realize that there's other avenues and opportunities to get access to someone, like myself. Yeah. So it's been really fantastic.
So you learning as a teacher and helping people to learn is a way that you stay sharp, but it's also something that, and I find this is true in what I do, where because you do it so often, you come to arrive at certain methodologies that have better outcomes than others. And so my first question to you here as we're talking is about education. It's about learning.
Yep.
What is the method that you've arrived at that brings about the best result when you're taking on a new client that wants to learn how to roast with excellence? Yeah,
it's definitely, great question in the sense of, I think I really started learning my training skills all the way back when I was a barista. So that's how I started getting into training, and there was a little bit more of that kind of formal training that came along with learning how to do all of the accredited barista training. There was like structure in like some of the classes with that. So I guess I wanted to take a little bit of that structure from those classes and see how to also apply that, with the roasting. But definitely, it evolves, over time, over the years. But there's always that process of, helping roasters connect with their knowledge about the green, how they're tasting, and then what that means then moving through into the roasting process. So I've often got to be very fluid and move with the level of experience, of the roaster, kind of like reading your client and making sure that you can, you might have like your set routine of I'll go in, I'll calibrate and taste with them, get an idea about how they have been roasting and what flavours they've been producing. This is if it's in like an on-site, like training consult. And then they'll tell me, there's no body or no sweetness. And so I go, great, now let's look at the profiles and let me show you where potentially that's missing in your roasting. So I'm a very big fan of helping people to show themselves about how they're roasting, maybe what they're missing, and then how they can better identify what to work on with their roasting. And so there can be like a little bit of like a formula to whether it be an online consult or even my training courses where you've got completely either brand new people or really experienced people in the class. But the leveling aspect is that we get the same coffee and we roast it 3 different ways. So even for an experienced roaster, they have to learn a new bean, but they also have to learn a new machine as well. So whatever machine I'm using in my space. So it's really great leveling. It doesn't matter whether you're experienced or inexperienced. They've all got to go through the same thought process about learning the green and then learning, like touching base with the theory, and then learning how to operate the roaster, and then put everything into practice practically on the machine. So there's always an element of the theory and then the practical, and then we taste and analyse, and then we then re-roast based on the analysis from the roasting and the tasting.
That is a lot of stretching that a person has to go through. It's probably frustrating for a lot of people. Yeah,
it can be. Like, it's a pretty intense kind of 2 days if it's like the roasting course. But I'm very passionate about even like new people that want to step into the world of roasting. I think it's really important that they get a taste of the reality of roasting. I'm not a very big fan of, you go to a class and they go, here's the coffee, it changes colour, and here's the machine, and you do this and press that and whatnot. I'm just like, no, we're getting in there, we're getting our hands dirty, and you're going to learn how to be decisive, because that's what's really important in roasting. And if you're not shown how to be decisive and what to focus on, then you're going to go ahead, you're going to set yourself up, and then you're going to step back and go, well, no one told me I had to work out how to calculate the rate of rise, or how to work out my profile and how to taste properly. Like, I did all this reading and I did all this, kind of like peripheral kind of classes, but you really need to get in there and be a part of the decision-making process. So it's really important, especially for new roasters, that they experience that. And the course is an opportunity for them to step away and go, do I like this or do I not like this? Or if they don't like it but they're still passionate about getting into coffee, how do they empower somebody else so they can then manage the business in another way and still be involved in roasting but maybe not necessarily doing it themselves?
Well, let's talk about that empowerment of other people, because half of the reason I'm wanting to know this from you is the idea that, I am, just as you are, aware of how many different apprentice roasters there are out there.
Yes.
That master roasters have to educate.
Yes.
Now, you're a professional roasting educator.
Yep.
And there's this whole train the trainer mentality.
Yes.
Right? So I guess the question I have is, how does this work for people who aren't necessarily professional educators but need to step into the role of educating somebody?
Yeah, yep. That's a wonderful question, because I would probably say that's possibly sometimes where a roasting company might get into a bit of a pickle, because if they themselves have never been shown how to communicate what they're doing, because you might often hear some roasters go, I just know how to do it. And if you just follow me, then you'll work it out. But if they're not Actually, and so my role is I've got the opportunity to step back and analyse, so then I can break it down and go, okay, well, if you want to learn how to roast, you want to do, you've got to learn about the different, profile strategies in terms of roast levels. You need to know how they taste, but you also need to know the data that then contributes to that roast level, so then you know then what that data then means when you go back to your roaster. So there's got to be like a connection from how you operate the roaster to the final flavour. And there needs to be a really decent feedback loop. So if a roaster isn't documenting enough data to show themselves why they like or don't like a coffee, so then they can show this to their apprentice, okay, so our standard light roast is these parameters, and this is how you do that, on this machine.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's our standard parameters for a medium roast and a dark roast. So then they know how it's created on the roaster. They then learn how to taste it and recognize it. And then they're also seeing the structure of the profile that creates that flavour. So there's got to be a really decent feedback loop from the data that we collect as roasters through to tasting and then back to the data again, because there might be something that we want to fix or change as a result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as a roaster, you would have had to already had those things in place and practicing them yourself.
Yes.
Rather than just making a special exception for the fact that you're training an apprentice roaster, and then all of a sudden, we never do these things, but because you're being educated, we're gonna teach you these things this way.
Yep.
Like that feedback loop has to be an institution in the business.
Yep. Yeah. And I think because what can happen, when you have an apprentice is that they get stuck following. Then they're not in an opportunity where they have to start making decisions, and that's when they do get frustrated. 100%. They definitely get to a point where, well, how do I know what to do when things start going off track? And that's when you've got to step in and help them and show them, okay, well, if it's going too fast, you do this. If it's going too slow, you make this decision. Because there's definitely a point where they're just like, well, I'm just pressing buttons and following steps, and that's it really. So
yeah.
And then they're not being that they don't get a chance to activate the creative part of roasting with that process. And
when you say creative, you're not talking about like changing the roast profile that they're taught. You're talking about just reaching into the tool bag of the, here, if this is the scenario, here's the tool to fix that.
Yes. Yep. Right. But also too, like they're definitely going to want to be in a position where, let's say they've spent, whether it be 6 months to a year, and they're very competent, very comfortable and confident at operating the roaster. They know all of the standard products inside out, back to front. And then they're given the opportunities to maybe create a profile for a new bean. Mm-hmm. And that's the scenario where you want them to be able to have the confidence to know, well, how do I start planning that, that profile? How do I then best roast that coffee to express it in the best way based on their experience with what they've learned with the, the stock products that they're doing day in, kind of day out.
Yeah, that's hard because at first you want to have them be kind of a follower in some sense.
Correct, yeah, you need that consistency. Yep.
Right, and then they graduate. But
correct. You
also have to have a lot of patience in the process. And if somebody's asking you a lot of questions, this happens in the barista world where people have this notion that, well, I tried training this barista with me like for a week or 2 weeks, and I don't think they're going to work out because they're just not getting it.
Yep.
And that seems kind of impatient to me, as if there is the right type of person. Not that there isn't some kind of personality trait that lends itself to being, you have to be okay being alone for long periods of time, I'm sure, to be a roaster.
Yep. Yes.
But, I mean, a lot of this stuff is not just like them, it's how are you bringing them up? Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And also too, I mean, like just as you were sort of chatting, I was just kind of, I had an experience recently where I'm based, we also offer the roaster, like for other roasters to rent time, and they brought in a new person. It was really interesting. Their background was production in manufacturing with Coca-Cola. So they were used to operating machinery. They were very comfortable with process, repeatability, all that kind of thing. But it was probably over after about a month, and they got a little bit too confident. And they kind of were, how do I say this? They started like talking on the phone and, you know, doing all that kind of stuff because they learnt how to follow very easily. And then all of a sudden, you know, something happened on the roaster, the alarms start going off and they lose that kind of like, it's the sense, you know, when you're roasting, you need to be connected with what the sounds and what's going on in the roaster. And then all of a sudden, you know, you've got, you know, alarms going off, machines going crazy and overheating and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's just really fascinating, like when you see and identifying the personalities and the types of people that really suit roasting and then how to best guide them. And yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, you know, I'm just curious about the reaction that most people would have in that situation and how much of that is like nature versus nurture, I suppose. Like in this scenario, I would be tempted to think that person would then say, okay, well, I just need to know another thing and plug it in the same way so that doesn't happen again. And it just goes whoosh. And they were definitely made aware of, you know, when to do certain things and not to do certain things, but I think they just got a little bit overconfident. I'm not sure if they're coming back. They might have gotten a little bit maybe nervous from, you know, that experience because they're going to burn the place down.
No, I don't know, but yeah, it was. There's also that little bit of level of trust too, because, you know, they're operating a machine, and yeah, there's definitely potential for things to go wrong very quickly. But it was very fascinating for me stepping back, watching the whole thing sort of unfold, and it really just reminded me of that, you know, the type of people that are suitable for the role of a roaster. How we go through that process of showing them, and then you've got to back away and let them take control, and then kind of learn, when things kind of, if they do. And as we know in roasting, the only way to learn is when, you know, things go wrong. As long as they don't keep on repeating it, and it becomes a bit of a financial problem. You know, if things get lost, you know, like you lose coffee or, you know, things unnecessarily, you know, breakdowns and, you know, damage can get done to the equipment, things like that. So,
okay. Yeah. Well, that's interesting because you stepping back and allowing that feels like, well, how do you do that? Because this is your baby.
Yes.
And you're just like, look at youngin', I don't want you to mess this up.
Yep.
But Anne tells me that I should step back. I mean, what's the appropriate amount of hands off and hands on?
Yeah, great question. I mean, as long as because you've got to be careful about micromanaging, you know, because there's a point where, and I guess maybe for me too, like with training, I'm probably dealing with, you know, a lot more, you know, adults. So you've got to think about that adult education kind of mentality as well. And people do want to get to a point where they're like, yep, I'm all good. Just, you know, leave me alone. Let me kind of, you know, work it out. So I guess as long as I feel that they've had enough direction about, you know, safe operation of the roaster, and if they choose to not follow those steps, then obviously that's when you have to step in and, you know, let them know, look, I really need you to follow these steps. And even like simple things like, you know, on this particular machine, you know, there's a certain number of roasts that you need to stop and empty the chaff. But if you do it while you have a batch in the roaster, there's every opportunity that the airflow pressure switch is going to, like, you know, sense that, you know, something's changed and it will shut the roaster down, and then you lose a batch and you're in trouble, all that kind of stuff. So so you just got to, there's a lot to kind of help remind them about, but unfortunately they also kind of need to experience it. So then it's like, oh, you told me not to do that and I just did it. Yeah.
And at a certain point you can, you know, take it on yourself to be the educator and be like, oh, they didn't get it, it must be my fault. I'll adjust.
Yep.
But then at a certain point maybe you have to make the decision that they're not the right person for this job.
Yep.
And if you're just too patient, maybe you'll miss that too far in.
Yep. And I guess also too, it's important that things are documented. It is also great having like a procedure that's actually, you know, physically there as well. Like I'm here in another country and, you know, I'm trusting other people to walk in and, you know, use the roaster, but there are documents there for them to follow. And of course, if they're not sure, they can always, you know, call me. But I think it's really important that you have that, that documentation as that kind of backup process to your processes as well.
Right, right. So you do these 2-day roasting courses.
Yep.
And these are just concentrated doses of education. Now, we're talking about master roasters educating apprentice roasters. Those are longer format.
Yeah.
But I want to emphasize the word format because it feels like you need sort of a bookend. You need a beginning and end, right?
Yep.
Otherwise, you're just going to keep going and you're never going to know when you're ready.
Yep.
So how would you go about creating a long format, like, or an appropriately lengthed format of training?
Yeah, I think because I often find like the 2-day class I find is it's intense, but it's enough for people to kind of walk away with an idea of all of the reality and the decision making. But I have also recently created what I call like production roasting practice. So because there's always that little bit of, well, how do I keep this rolling? Like, what's next? Like, I've just learned all this amazing stuff in the class. How do I put it into practice? And so then I get them to come in and we actually do proper production roasting, actual products that are going out to customers, and they get to see, you know, the whole proper process, you know, from, you know, morning to the end of the day. There's that kind of aspect after the 2-day course. But as far as like you know, with like an apprenticeship, you know, kind of program, I mean, I would probably approach that more in the sense of they do need to sort of start following and I think staying focused on a specific product first, and, you know, get very used to and know that product, and then obviously move on to the next product, because there is potential for a little bit of how do I say, like a bit of nervousness and possibly confusion if they're, you know, changing things
like
kind of
one
too
origin
much.
Like you're going to just roast this particular Brazil,
or maybe just
only
focus on this, you know, house blend, and just, you know, nail that and really use that as your base point for then how to then move on to roasting the next product. So then they get because at the same time they're learning all of the ins and outs of operating the roaster. They're also learning aspects of the profile, and then of course they're also learning about the flavors, you know, that come along with that particular product and that roasting. So, you know, whether it could, you know, whether it's over a month or 3 months or 6 months, it's just would just depend on how they, you know, progress. And I guess you would have to sort of come up with some good measurable ways to kind of show them, okay, you've nailed that, let's move on to the next one from there.
And you mentioned the tracking and having that, because otherwise you could have people roasting. This happens when people do shadow shifts on coffee bars. They're supposed to be training on the bar, but they're actually just doing dishes. They're not. You're not paying attention to them.
Or, you know, unfortunately, like, you don't want to shove them off over into packing, and they're just like putting stickers on bags and doing all of that, which is super important in roasting as well. I know while I'm roasting, the first, you know, that magic first 5 minutes is all about getting bags ready and, you know, trying to make up for time. So because, you know, when you get to the end of the day and you kind of go, now I've got to pack everything. And bag preparation can be, you know, a little bit cumbersome. And you don't want to flick them off. And I would unfortunately probably see that if a roaster isn't confident enough to be able to guide that apprentice, you know, thoroughly enough. So it would be a shame if this person came in and then all of a sudden they're just focusing on everything but, you know, the roasting.
Exactly. True. The words thoroughly enough, and also this, well, it wasn't a word, but it was a sigh that you let out at the thought of being at the end of a long roast day. And obviously you can't really, you're going to learn something deep and visceral at that moment, but when you're training, you have to know when to stop. Like if I'm training baristas, they're not going to retain information past a certain point. So how do we recognize that? Because a roaster who's really intuitive about what they're doing and now they're tasked with educating, they're uncomfortable, and now they might make the trainee feel uncomfortable by just obliterating them by being thorough, right?
Yeah, possibly. So I guess that would, you know, you would really want to make sure that there's like the structure in terms of showing them how to plan the roast day, like setting expectations for the day. I think that would be super important. So then they can come in, they know that they've got to come in, you know, turn on the roaster, whether they, you know, need to do a little bit of spot cleaning, scoop out the green, map out the roast log production for the day, and then they then know what kind of packaging they need to start preparing. So then they've got, there should be like a really good structure to that whole process. So then the apprentice knows at least what they're walking into, and how long it's going to take. I think it's super important to have that, those expectations laid down. So then there's that not that potential of, if it's a really busy day, at least they know that they're in for a good maybe 3, 4, 5 hours roasting.
Yeah.
But at the end of that, they've also got to pack, then you've got to clean, and you've got to make sure that everything's basically reset to do it all over again the next day. So you would want to have that work day flow, the expectation laid out very clearly.
Yeah, because you're psychologically preparing them
100%
for it.
Yep.
And
because you can't go, oh, by the way, we're going to roast. Oh, no, now we're going to go pack. Oh, no, wait, now we have to go and do this. And it'd be like,
oh, yeah.
Whoa, what do you want me to do?
So overwhelming. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And traumatic. I mean, not to throw the word around lightly, but in some definitions of trauma is just you have no control over a situation.
Yep.
No expectation. You're just along for the ride, and it's not a fun ride.
No, it's not. And especially if, again, whoever's training them is also not like showing them. If they're just telling them, that's when it's definitely not gonna work. There needs to be like a goal and how they're showing them, and also explaining why. And this is where, especially if you're working with the brand, like helping them really understand this product needs to be roasted this way because it has a specific end goal for the customer. So then you don't want to create, I call them rogue roasters, where you don't want to sort of like, because as roasters, there's some products that you just kind of go, oh, this product just does my head in, but I know it's a really good, seller for the company.
Yes.
As long as you're very clear and upfront about, why it's being roasted a certain way, and then there's no, potential for this person to go, oh, I wasn't told that I had to follow this. I'm going to try something different or pull it out at a different temperature, because that's the current trend at the moment. And unfortunately, I've seen companies that have been completely crippled when there's no clear direction from the top down, and a roaster can go off on a massive tangent and really change, a product that built a company, and all of a sudden it's not that product anymore. So there needs to be good structure from top down, which brings in another whole level of, management and, I guess confidence from whether it be management, owners, and their direction to the roasters about what they want to achieve with their roasting and products.
You bring up something very good, which is most people think they've communicated, and they haven't.
Yeah. Yep.
And so you're talking about the rogue roasters. Well, they never said this, and they say, well, we shouldn't have to say that.
Yep.
You're an adult. Figure it out. But we can't just assume that, can we?
No, definitely not. And I think, and also maybe, I could be assuming a bit too much. Sometimes in the industry, people are a little bit nervous about their ability to taste and communicate. And maybe sometimes if an owner isn't confident, they just kind of know it works, and they can't communicate why it works in terms of the flavour and the taste. And then, of course, if that's then not communicated, to the roaster, then the roaster's going to go, well, it might taste better this way, so I'm going to take it in this direction. But so I think tasting can sort of play a role in that, or a bit of nervousness there as well. But
well, you have an outline for what you want them to learn throughout the day, and you say, look, this is how it's going to go from the week 1, month 1 to the end of 3 or 4, maybe 6 months or so.
I think there needs to be measurable goals for sure.
Milestones that they can reach. Micro and macro. Now, for me as the educator, how do I hold myself accountable? Do I have a separate list of things that I'm making sure that I cover with them through the day while they're in those stations, so that I'm just planning for myself?
I'd say so, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, because, no doubt, as long as we're clear, because there's I think, there's the milestones, there's the things to achieve. So if we know that the things that they're working on is going to help them get to a certain milestone, then that's also going to keep us in line with, it might prevent us from either leapfrogging to something that's meant to happen in the next stage of the training, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It'll help us to kind of hold back and not overwhelm them with too much, because it's funny how you said the word, was it like terrifying or kind of like trauma? Yeah, trauma. Yeah. Because I often say the most traumatic part of roasting is learning how to start the roast and end the roast. And so, it is important that we kind of, and also gauging their ability and their pace at how they take on information and how they then perform those tasks as well. But also recognising and giving them the chance to, we might also have to change our style of how we train and communicate relevant to where they're at as well. And I might be really I might like using a certain training tool, but that person just doesn't connect with it. It's just not their style.
Right.
Maybe they like using more tangible pen and paper, versus if I'm forcing them to use software and they're just like, my brain just can't, I just can't deal with that. And I'll be like, nope, that's it. But if we recognise that they are still a really good fit for the role, then it's up to me to find other ways to help facilitate that, that learning process. So there's definitely nothing wrong with, changing the tools or changing the way we help them learn, as long as, at the end of the day, they're getting to that end goal and achieving those milestones. So I think that's possibly where maybe, some apprenticeships could get a little bit maybe screwed up, because we're not recognising how they also best learn. And I often have to do that sometimes in my classes, where I've actually got to just kind of pull back and go, okay, well, maybe this format isn't working for this person. Yeah. Let's try something else. And most of the time it will possibly be the people completely new, to roasting, and they want to explore and learn, is this for me? And sometimes the software is just, it's a lot because, you're watching the roaster, you're watching the software, you're trying to make decisions on how to manage and control the roaster, but also you've got numbers and lines all over the place, and it's just kind of like, wow, what is going on? So if it means using pen and paper and making notes, and if that's what helps them start to connect with the process, then so be it. You would only have it. You're talking about earlier having the tools at their disposal to make decisions and be decisive. Yep. And you can be creative in that because 100%. You've got right. But now, as a educator, you also have to have your own tools. Yep. And you're not just showing them the ropes and roasting. You have to learn a variety of ways to communicate roasting. Yep, absolutely. And actually, I really love when you get those situations where if I recognize that some of my tools might not be working, I get a chance to be creative as well, because I get to create new tools. So it's actually kind of cool. Yeah. So there's definitely different versions of, some of my training tools over the years that have just evolved in response to just people's learning needs, basically. Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of potential is left on the floor in situations where we are not doing the kind of thing you were just describing, which is learning as a teacher. And people are not learning properly, and they're left to fend for themselves. They're in fight or flight all the time. Yeah. And we're literally tasting the results, and the cumulative effect of that seems like you couldn't pin it down, and so it's not like this issue that we're always talking about, but it's there. It's in the ether. Just bad information, bad teaching of information leads to bad coffee. Yes. Well, I'm glad we have you teaching coffee.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think this was really educational to get some insights into how we need to kind of craft our approach to helping people craft coffee. It's perfect.
Yeah, and I think it's more than anything, it's like, as long as people have an opportunity they've got to show themselves what they're doing, so then they can analyze it, and then they can decide, do they like it or do they not like it? And if they don't like it, it's right in front of them. Like, they know then what to then try and target and change, and then they know how to go back to the roasting and try and fix whatever it was that they didn't like. So I'm a really big fan of that whole big feedback loop. And it's kind of like funny to say, but it's probably one of the hardest things I have to work with roasters, is taking them through that process of showing themselves, because they're so busy just like smashing out their production and getting the day-to-day done, that they start to slip and they don't show themselves enough, either in like taking notes or doing their roast log sheets and all that kind of stuff. So they just kind of go, oh, I know that product really well, you know, it's fine. But when they have to go and then train somebody, if they don't have a record of showing themselves why they like that product and how it's roasted, that's when it starts getting, really hard. And unfortunately, that's when, you know, things get a bit inconsistent and, the whole process sort of starts from there. But even for those, you know, people that are learning, whether they're like, doesn't matter whether you're a home roaster, beginner, professional or whatnot, you've got to go through that process of showing yourself. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, Anne.
Yeah, thank you so much for chatting to me again. Yeah, it's fantastic too.
All right, everybody. Well, I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. I hope that this conversation has given you some ideas of how you can approach training with the people that want to become roasters in your roastery. And Anne's hard-fought-for wisdom and years of experience in this field is a gold mine of information for us to apply to our different situations. This is really a human-to-human interaction. As in all things training, when you're talking about people, you need to work with them with empathy, you need to have patience, you need to give time and give some structure in this process. This is too important of a topic and field to be playing around with as if it's just transactional and people will just download the information. It has to be focused on people, and I love Anne's approach to serving people through her training. If you want to learn more about what she offers through Equilibrium Master Roasters, you can just go to her website. That's over at eqmr.com.au for Equilibrium Master Roasters. So a big thank you to Anne for joining us on the show today. We really appreciate you, Anne. Now, I want to let you know that you can also view the video of this interview over at the Roast Magazine website, over at roastmagazine.com. Just go to their video section. So if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to send me an email. It's chris@keystotheshop.com. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, that is the end of the episode. Thanks everybody so much for joining me. And don't forget to subscribe to Roast Magazine. Have an awesome day. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.